The 10,007th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite a representative of Israel to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in this meeting in accordance with the provisional rules of procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invited Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Now I give the floor to Mr. Ramiz Alakbarov.
Mr. President, Excellencies, today's briefing is devoted to the 35th report of the Secretary General on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334. It covers the period from 18 June to 19 September. Security Council Resolution 2334, adopted in 2016, calls on Israel to immediately and completely cease all settlement activity in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and to fully respect all of its obligations in this regard. Settlement activity has nevertheless accelerated. During the reporting period, the Israeli planning authorities advanced or approved approximately 20,810 housing units in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This includes in Area C approximately 5,430 housing units, which were advanced, and some 10,600 units which were approved, while in East Jerusalem 4,780 housing units were advanced. On 11 August, tenders were published for 4,030 housing units in the settlements of Ma'ale Adumim and Ariel. On 20th August, the Israeli High Planning Committee advanced a plan for the construction of more than 3,400 housing units in the E1 area. On 2nd July, 15 Israeli ministers and the Speaker of the Knesset signed a petition calling for Israel to annex the occupied West Bank, and on 23rd July the Knesset adopted a non-binding motion calling for the application of Israeli sovereignty across all settlements in the West Bank. Demolitions and seizures of Palestinian-owned structures also accelerating. Citing the lack of Israeli-issued building permits, which are almost impossible for Palestinians to obtain, Israeli authorities demolished, seized or forced people to demolish 455 structures in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, displacing 420 persons, including 175 children and 118 women. 30 of these structures were donor-funded. Evictions of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem also continued. Mr. President, Security Council Resolution 2334 calls for immediate steps to prevent all acts of violence against civilians, including acts of terror, as well as acts of provocation and destruction. Acts of violence against civilians continue to escalate to the high number of fatal incidents across the occupied Palestinian territory, and Israel precluding me from detailing all. Israeli military actions intensified throughout Gaza, striking schools, hospitals, residential buildings, and hitting IDP tents and people trying to access aid, resulting in high numbers of Palestinian casualties. Continued massive displacement of civilians and widespread destruction, including to civilian infrastructure. According to the Gaza Ministry of Health, at least 7,579 Palestinians were killed and at least 37,201 were injured. 37,201 were injured in Gaza, a majority of whom are reportedly women and children in the reporting period. And 1,911 were reportedly killed while attempting to collect aid, including in the vicinity of militarized distribution sites. According to the Israeli sources, 37 Israeli Defense Force soldiers were killed in hostilities in Gaza. According to Israeli sources, 48 hostages are still being held captive by Palestinian armed groups in Gaza following recovery during the reporting period of the bodies of the 5 hostages by Israeli Defense Forces. 25 of the remaining hostages are believed to be deceased. 30 UN personnel were killed during the reporting period. Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza continued to sporadically fire rockets indiscriminately towards Israel. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad released 4 videos appearing to show hostages in an emaciated condition. On 8 August, the Israeli government announced its decision to take control of Gaza City. Israeli forces have carried out heavy bombardment of Gaza City since late August, hitting residential areas, including numerous multi-story buildings, tents, schools, as well as other public infrastructure, resulting in high numbers of casualties. On 27 August, the IDF instructed residents to leave for the southern part of the Strip and launch a large-scale ground operation with intensified attacks, forcibly displacing Palestinian civilians and demolishing civilian objects, especially residential buildings, with reports indicating the destruction of the whole neighborhoods through controlled detonations. Meantime, violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, continued at an alarming rate. Overall, in the occupied West Bank, 46 Palestinians, including 1 woman and 12 children, were killed during ISF operations, armed exchanges, airstrikes, settler attacks, demonstrations, and other incidents. 890 Palestinians, including 152 children, were injured, including 319 by ISF due to tear gas inhalation and 130 by live ammunition, and 230 by Israeli settlers and other civilians. According to Israeli sources, 7 Israelis, including 1 woman, were killed by armed Palestinians, and another 62, including 1 child and at least 1 woman, and 14 ISF personnel were injured by Palestinians in shooting, stabbing, and ramming attacks and other incidents. Israeli security forces' large-scale operation continued in northern West Bank sites and refugee camps, particularly in Tulkaram and Jenin, alongside operations across other areas in the West Bank, including in Area A. On 31st August, new military orders declared parts of Nur Shams and Tulkaram refugee camps closed military zones. While there have been some limited returns, tens of thousands of Palestinians remain displaced from northern refugee camps. Children continue to be killed by Israeli security forces. For example, a 15-year-old Palestinian was shot and killed on 25th June during a search operation west of Jenin. On 22nd and 23rd July, also in Jenin, 2 boys, a 15-year-old and 13-year-old, were shot and killed after reportedly throwing stones at ISF. On 8 September, Israeli forces shot and killed 2 Palestinian boys, aged 14, who were attempting to enter Jenin refugee camp. Israeli security forces carried out at least 2,500 search and arrest operations in the occupied West Bank. Israel currently holds at least 2,662 Palestinians in administrative detention amidst persistent reports of abuse during detention. Daily settler-related attacks intensified, often in presence of Israeli forces. On 25th June, 3 Palestinians were killed by ISF after dozens of settlers attacked the village of Kafr Malik, northeast of Ramallah. In Akraba town, southeast of Nablus, on 2nd August, Israeli settlers shot and killed a 24-year-old Palestinian man and injured 8 others. Palestinian attacks against Israelis also continued. On 8 September, 2 Palestinians opened fire at a bus station at the Ramot Junction, northwest of East Jerusalem, killing 6 Israelis and injuring 21 others. The attackers were both killed at the scene. Mr. President, the Security Council in its Resolution 2334 called upon both parties to refrain from provocative actions, incitement, and inflammatory rhetoric. Unfortunately, such acts continued. Hamas praised and claimed responsibility for the 8 September attack against Israeli civilians in Jerusalem and praised the 18 September attack in which 2 Israeli soldiers were killed at the Al-Karama Allenby Bridge, calling both heroic operations. Hamas officials continued to call for additional violent attacks against Israelis. PA-affiliated official media and social media continued to glorify perpetrators of past attacks against Israelis. Senior Israeli officials continued to call for the mass displacement of Palestinians outside Gaza, expansion of Israeli military operations towards the full control of Gaza by Israel, and the establishment of settlements in Gaza. Some also called for annexation and advancement of settlements in the occupied West Bank that would bury the idea of a Palestinian state, and called for stopping all humanitarian aid and life-saving services into Gaza until all hostages are released. A senior official released a statement asserting that there will be no Palestinian state to the west of the Jordan River, and highlighting his past efforts to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. Senior Israeli officials also conducted inflammatory visits to Jerusalem holy sites, with openly violating the status quo. Mr. President, Resolution 2334 reiterated calls by the Middle East Quartet for affirming steps to be taken immediately to reverse negative trends on the ground that are imperiling the two-state solution. After 23 months of fighting, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is beyond the breaking point. On 22nd August, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification confirmed famine in Gaza Governorate, marking the first time a famine has been officially confirmed in the Middle East region. More than 500,000 people are facing widespread starvation. Famine is projected to expand to Deir al-Balah and Han Yunis by the end of September. According to the Ministry of Health in Gaza, as of 19 September, 440 malnutrition-related deaths, including 147 children, were documented since October 2023. Increased mass IDF evacuation orders and the expansion of Israeli militarized zone have pushed people into less than 14% of the Gaza Strip. Since 14 August, nearly over 380,000 displacement movements have been recorded, with most people moving from Gaza City towards the already overcrowded south, where displacement sites are overpopulated and health and water infrastructure have sustained severe damage, exposing the population to grave health risks. Aid is frequently offloaded from trucks, including by starving and desperate people, and in some cases looted by armed criminal groups before reaching warehouses. Israel has allowed an increase in some types of aid entering Gaza, as well as commercial traffic. This step has helped to reduce the prices of some key commodities, but falls short of what is needed to address humanitarian needs in the Strip. Following a shooting attack at the Al-Karama Allenby crossing with Jordan, the entry of aid for Gaza via the crossing was suspended, along with all other cargo. The Palestinian Authority continues to face a severe fiscal crisis, undermining public service delivery. Israel continues to withhold all Palestinian clearance revenues, which the Palestinian Authority says now total some $2 billion in withheld revenue since October 2023. On 20 July, Palestinian President Abbas issued a decree announcing elections for the Palestinian National Council. The decree also established a preparatory committee tasked with making the arrangements for the organization of the process, which held its first meeting on the 7th August. President Abbas also established a committee to draft an interim constitution via decree on 18 August. It is intended to define separation of powers, democratic governance, the peaceful transfer of authority, and the legal framework for elections. Mr. President, in Resolution 2334, the Security Council also called upon all states to distinguish in their relevant dealings between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. On 2 September, Belgium announced its intention to impose sanctions on Israel, including, inter alia, a ban on the importing of products from settlements, a review of public procurement policies with Israeli companies, and restrictions on consular assistance to Belgians living in illegal settlements. Resolution 2334 also called upon all parties to continue, inter alia, to exert collective efforts to launch credible negotiations on all final status issues in the Middle East peace process. On 28-30 July, France and Saudi Arabia co-chaired a high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. The conference culminated in the New York Declaration outlining an actionable framework for the implementation of the two-state solution. On 12 September, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution endorsing the New York Declaration. Mr. President, in closing, allow me to share Secretary General's observations on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334, adopted in 2016, in the occupied Palestinian territory, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Israeli settlement expansion continues accelerate alongside the proliferation of outposts and steps in the Israeli Knesset promoting the annexation of the West Bank. Israeli settlements have no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation of international law and resolutions. They are systematically shrinking the territory of the Palestinian state and further entrenching Israel's unlawful occupation. The advancement of the EU1 plan is a calamitous development. If implemented, it would effectively sever the connection between the northern and southern West Bank, further undermining the contiguity of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state, increasing risk of forced displacement and fueling tensions. The government of Israel must abide by its obligations under international law. I recall the findings by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, which declared inter alia that State of Israel is under obligation to cease immediately all new settlement activities, evacuate all settlers, and bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible. I am also deeply concerned by the statements of intent by Israeli government officials to further annex all or parts of the occupied Palestinian territory. In addition to settlement activities, Palestinians face displacement, demolitions, and crippling movement and access restrictions that stifle the economy and severely limit access to employment, hospitals, schools, and agricultural land. These policies are further fueling frustration and hopelessness, while severely undermining the Palestinian Authority. The demolition and seizure of Palestinian structures, including internationally funded humanitarian projects, entails numerous human rights violations and raises concerns about the risk of forcible transfer. I call on the government of Israel to cease the demolition of the Palestinian-owned structures in accordance with its international obligations. I once strongly condemn the horrific attack by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups on 7 October 2023 and the continued holding of hostages in horrendous conditions in Gaza. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. I condemn Hamas' appalling videos depicting emaciated Israeli hostages. While in captivity, hostages must be treated humanely and allowed to receive visits and assistance from the International Committee of the Red Cross. I am appalled by the escalation of Israeli military operations throughout the Gaza Strip, which continues to bring death at an unprecedented rate and destruction to Palestinians. I condemn the killing of civilians in Gaza, including women and children. The situation in Gaza is morally, politically, and legally intolerable. Mass casualty incidents have mounted as operations in Gaza City expand. The collective punishment of Palestinian people can never be justified and must end immediately. The forced displacement of Palestinian population from any part of the occupied Palestinian territory is unacceptable and violates international law. I strongly reject any form of ethnic cleansing. The protection of civilians is paramount in any armed conflict. Parties to conflict have an obligation to respect international humanitarian law. I'm concerned over what may be violations of international humanitarian law, including possible non-compliance with the requirements of distinction, proportionality, and precautions in attack, and the prohibition on the use of human shields. Member States have an obligation to ensure respect of international humanitarian law. I call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and unfettered humanitarian access across Gaza. I welcome the continued efforts of the mediators to reach a deal and urge all sides to end these devastating hostilities immediately. There is no military solution. The International Court of Justice had issued legally binding provisional measures in the case named application of the Convention and on the Convention on the Prevention of and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. The continued heightened level of violence in the West Bank is deeply alarming. I call on Israel as the occupying power to protect the Palestinian population against attacks and intimidation. I condemn all acts of violence against civilians, including acts of terror. I am deeply concerned that persistent and intensifying settler attacks, including sometimes in the proximity and with the support of Israeli security forces, are further displacing Palestinian communities, including in Area C. Residents continue to be denied the right to return home. Palestinian attacks against Israelis must also cease. All perpetrators of violent attacks must be held accountable. Reported mistreatment of Palestinians held by Israel is deeply disturbing. All detainees must be treated humanely, and Palestinians arbitrarily detained by Israel must be released. I am also disturbed by the multiple instances in which officials on both sides have glorified violence and engaged in dangerous provocations, incitement, and inflammatory language, which must be rejected by all. I am appalled at the horrific humanitarian situation in Gaza, with unbearable level of suffering and untenable living conditions. Famine in Gaza is a man-made disaster. I called on Israel to fulfill its obligation under international law, including allowing and facilitating the rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access into and throughout Gaza. The recent limited increase in humanitarian aid is nowhere near what is required. The UN and our partners have a proven and principled plan to get aid to a desperate population. We must be allowed to safely and securely distribute assistance to people in need wherever they are. All parties must respect and protect humanitarian personnel. I mourn the United Nations personnel killed in Gaza and strongly condemn the killing of all health and humanitarian personnel. These incidents must stop and be thoroughly and independently investigated, and perpetrators must be accountable. I expressed my deepest appreciation to UNRWA and the UN agencies and personnel and humanitarian aid workers who remain committed to their work across OPT despite the significant security risk. I recall that inviolability of United Nations premises must be respected at all times. I also strongly condemn the killing of journalists in Gaza. Israel's implementation of punitive economic and fiscal measures is destabilizing Palestinian institutions and threatening the viability of Palestinian Authority. I urge Israel to immediately cease all such unilateral steps. I reiterate my call to the parties to respect and uphold the status quo at the holy sites in Jerusalem, taking into account the special and historic role of Jordan. The announcement of Palestinian National Council elections within a year after the conflict in Gaza comes to an end is welcome along the steps taken towards their preparation. I commend France and Saudi Arabia for co-chairing the high-level international conference on the two-state solution and call on the international community to seize this momentum and mobilize the political will and resources for the tangible, irreversible steps to the achievement of the two-state solution. The UN stands ready to support all efforts to advance a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. The continued devastation and misery on the ground, particularly over the past 2 years, have reinforced the absolute need for Israelis, Palestinians, regional states, and broader international community to take urgent steps that will end the unlawful occupation and enable the parties to re-engage on the long-delayed political path to resolve Israeli-Palestinian conflict in line with international law and UN resolutions, realizing a two-state solution. Israel and Palestine, of which Gaza is an integral part, live side by side in peace and security to their secure and recognized borders on the basis of pre-1967 lines with Jerusalem as the capital of both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alakbarov, for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wishes to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Russia Federation.
Господин председатель, благодарим заместителя спецкоординатора ООН по ближневосточному мирному процессу Рамиза Алакбарова за обстоятельный доклад о ситуации на оккупированной палестинской территории в контексте выполнения резолюции Совета Безопасности 2334. К сожалению, как ясно из вашего доклада, поводов для оптимизма у нас как не было, так и нет. Резолюция не только не выполняется, но и откровенно нарушается. Обнародованные в середине августа планы руководства Израиля по реанимированию плана застройки поселениями зоны И-1 на западном берегу ставят под угрозу перспективы двухгосударственного решения. В случае реализации этой задумки стоимостью $1 миллиард, предполагающей возведение 3412 жилищных единиц и строительство новых дорог и инфраструктурных объектов, СБРИ будет поделен на две части. Восточный Иерусалим будет отрезан от остальной части палестинской территории. Точнее всего, намерение сторонников такого плана описал израильский министр финансов Бецалель Смотрич, который не без гордости сказал: это похоронит идею палестинского государства. При этом те, кто сегодня утверждают, что незаконная поселенческая активность стала ответом на теракты 7 октября, откровенно лукавят. Все это часть долгосрочной стратегии, последовательно уже много лет продвигаемой религиозными ультранационалистами, оправдывающими нарушение международного права ссылками на Ветхий Завет. Они усматривают за Израилем священное право на эти земли. Палестинцы же в их картине мира совершенно лишние люди, которым нет места в том, что они называют Иудеей и Самарией. Поэтому не стоит удивляться, что только из пресловутой зоны И-1 с 2009 года насильственно перемещено 900 палестинцев, а более 500 домов было снесено, включая 200 построенных на деньги международных спонсоров. Нелепые попытки оправдать угрозы аннексии недавней волной признаний Палестины со стороны ряда западных государств. Эти шаги были вызваны как раз целенаправленной политикой Западного Иерусалима по подрыву двухгосударственного решения, а не наоборот. Господин председатель, планы по строительству новых поселений были бы невозможны без опоры на фанатично настроенных колонистов, готовых к любому насилию в отношении палестинского населения. Не следует заблуждаться и думать, что они действуют сами по себе. Поселенцы получают безоговорочную поддержку со стороны властей. Израильские правоохранительные органы либо закрывают глаза на их преступления, либо принимают в этом участие. Более того, миллионы долларов выделяются правительством Израиля на обеспечение и вооружение поселенцев с тем, чтобы они изгоняли палестинцев со своих земель. Россия решительно осуждает незаконное строительство поселений на ОПТ, насилие со стороны экстремистски настроенных колонистов, а также разжигающую рознь риторику. Требуем от Израиля вернуться к неукоснительному выполнению резолюции Совета Безопасности 2334 и отказаться от дальнейших планов по аннексии СБРИ. На прошлой неделе международное сообщество ясно продемонстрировало непоколебимую приверженность двухгосударственному решению как на международной конференции высокого уровня, так и в выступлениях в ходе общеполитической дискуссии. И президент Соединенных Штатов Дональд Трамп в ходе встречи с высокопоставленными делегатами из ряда арабо-мусульманских государств на полях недели высокого уровня для обсуждения ближневосточного урегулирования подчеркнул, что не позволит Израилю аннексировать Западный берег. Хочется надеяться, что за этими словами последуют конкретные действия. Подключение Вашингтона к международным усилиям по разрешению застарелого палестино-израильского конфликта на известной международно-правовой базе жизненно необходимо для того, чтобы обернуть вспять разворачивающуюся у нас на глазах трагедию. Ведь именно безоговорочная американская поддержка до настоящего момента позволяла Израилю творить что угодно, не неся за это ответственности. Как показывает исторический опыт, Западный Иерусалим шел на мирные договоренности лишь тогда, когда в Белом доме находился сильный и принципиальный лидер, готовый на смелые решения ради достижения мира. Рассчитываем, что нынешняя американская администрация действительно приложит необходимые усилия и остановит противоправные действия Израиля. Господин председатель, позиция России по палестино-израильскому регулированию носит принципиальный характер и не подвержена конъюнктурным политическим колебаниям. Последовательно выступаем за немедленное, безусловное и повсеместное прекращение огня, освобождение заложников и насильственно удерживаемых лиц, обеспечение безопасного и беспрепятственного гуманитарного доступа в соответствии с известными руководящими принципами, перезапуск мирного процесса на общепризнанной международно-правовой основе с центральной двугосударственной формулой, обеспечивающей защиту фундаментальных прав палестинцев на самоопределение и возвращение их справедливых чаяний на собственно независимое и жизнеспособное государство в границах 1967 года со столицей в Восточном Иерусалиме, сосуществующей в мире и безопасности с Израилем. Палестинцы заслуживают своего государства не меньше, чем израильтяне. Соблюдение их прав – единственный возможный выбор для любого ответственного члена международного сообщества. Игнорирование этого наносит прямой вред самому Израилю, заинтересованному в надежном обеспечении собственной безопасности. Решить эту задачу за счет интересов палестинцев и арабских соседей Израиля не получится. И чем раньше в Западном Иерусалиме осознают это, тем лучше. Благодарю вас.
Thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East process, for his informative briefing. I welcome the participation of the representatives of Israel and Palestine in this meeting. This briefing on the implementation of Resolution 2334 reminds us of our shared responsibility to ensure that Security Council resolutions are not mere words on paper, but instruments of peace, security, and above all, the protection of civilians. As international momentum behind the two-state solution gathers strength, Sierra Leone recalls the binding provisions of Resolution 2334 and urges its full and immediate implementation. Mr. President, across the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, civilian casualties continue to rise daily, and international humanitarian law continues to be violated. Of particular concern are the forcible displacement of Palestinians from their homes, escalating settler violence, and the worsening humanitarian catastrophe. These violations have become the status quo, a deeply unacceptable reality that perpetuates immense suffering and undermines prospects for peace. The message from world leaders at the high-level general debate of the 80th session of the General Assembly has been clear. Lasting peace in the Middle East will remain elusive unless the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians are addressed, the security concerns of Israel also addressed within lawful means, accountability is ensured for violations of international law, and a credible political horizon is restored. Sierra Leone welcomes the recent recognition of the State of Palestine by several member states and the adoption of the New York Declaration as important steps towards that horizon. we recall the powerful words of the President of the State of Palestine, who reminded the Assembly that peace cannot be achieved if justice is not achieved, and there can be no justice if Palestine is not free. Sierra Leone reaffirms that peace must be anchored in justice, dignity, and the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including their right to live in freedom and security in an independent and sovereign state. Mr. President, actualizing a just and lasting peace requires a comprehensive approach grounded in international law and the full implementation of all relevant provisions and resolutions, including Resolution 2334. In this regard, we highlight key provisions that remain central to improving the situation on the ground. First, Israel must fulfill its obligation to protect civilians in times of conflict. Civilians in Gaza must be shielded from indiscriminate bombardment, and Palestinians in the West Bank must be protected from settler violence, intimidation, and forced displacement. We are gravely concerned by the recent attack in the Nusrat refugee camp and call on Israel to exercise maximum precaution to avoid civilian harm. Perpetrators of settler violence must be held accountable. Likewise, all hostages held by Hamas must be released immediately, unconditionally, and in safety and dignity. Second, Israel must immediately and completely cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. The continued expansion of settlements, including the approval of new projects at unprecedented rates, undermines the viability of the two-state solution. As the Resolution 2334 makes clear, settlements have no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation of international law. Sierra Leone echoes the General Assembly and the International Court of Justice in affirming that such policies must cease without delay. Third, all parties must act in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law, and take urgent steps to de-escalate tensions. We call on them to refrain from incitement, provocative actions, and inflammatory rhetoric. Above all, they must ensure unimpeded and safe delivery of humanitarian aid. We support the New York Declaration's call for the immediate, unconditional, and sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale, the opening of crossings, and the protection of relief workers. No civilian, especially no child, should die from starvation, malnutrition, or preventable disease. Israel must fulfill its obligations as the occupying power, and Hamas must not divert aid meant for civilians. Fourth, we reiterate the resolution's call for intensified and accelerated international and regional diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving without delay a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. The New York Declaration's vision of a concrete, time-bound, and irreversible step toward an independent, sovereign, and democratic state of Palestine, living side by side with Israel in peace and security, must guide renewed political engagement. The international community must work towards an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the release of all hostages and detainees, and the launch of a credible political process that resolves all final status issues and ends the occupation. Mr. President, Sierra Leone condemns all violence against civilians, whether committed by state or non-state actors. We share the conviction expressed in the New York Declaration that war occupation, terrorism, and forced displacement will not bring peace or security. Only a negotiated political solution that respects the sovereignty, security, and dignity of both peoples can deliver lasting peace. In closing, we reiterate that peace is not beyond reach. It requires courage, justice, and commitment from all parties to end the occupation, end the violence, and recommit to the principles of coexistence and mutual recognition. Full adherence to Resolution 2334 and the spirit of the New York Declaration would be an essential first step towards that future. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov, for your briefing. Unfortunately, colleagues, today's meeting is yet another example of this Council's obsessive focus on Israel. This is the second time in less than a week that this Council has met on this subject. As I noted then, there have been more than 80 meetings on Israel since October 7th. This constant drumbeat of meetings only distract from and unfortunately undermine the serious work needed to address issues of international peace and security, including the United States' efforts to free all 48 hostages who remain in Hamas's captivity right now as we speak. Our work to bring this war to an end and to give Gaza and the Palestinian people a future free from Hamas. Resolution 2334, the ostensible focus of today's briefing, is a fundamentally flawed resolution. It wrongly delegitimizes Israel, including by denying the reality that Jerusalem is its lawful capital. Resolution 2334 exemplifies the outmoded thinking that has led to failure after failure in Middle East diplomacy. Every 3 months, this Council considers the implementation of 2334 by rote. This is in addition to the regular monthly briefing and the quarterly general debates on the Middle East, which focus almost entirely on Israel. And so this constant drumbeat of meetings continues to distract from doing the actual work. Doing the actual work, colleagues, that many pressing threats to international peace elsewhere around the world so sorely need. So perfunctory briefings like this one today do nothing to end the conflict or bring the war to a close. The United States continues to work tirelessly to free all 48 hostages and end the war. President Trump just last week told the General Assembly that empty words do not solve wars. Action does. Action does. President Trump just this last week hosted a key meeting with the leaders of Arab and Muslim majority states to coordinate the day after planning for Gaza. Not only is he putting real plans on the table to end the war and free the hostages and stop the suffering, but he's already putting plans forward for the day after to make sure this never happens again. We cannot repeat ourselves. We cannot. The definition of insanity is to continue to repeat this year after year. Colleagues, if we want to end the war, we need to place accountability where it belongs, with the terrorist organization known as Hamas. The United Nations has yet to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, even as it holds 48 hostages in horrific conditions, which will include, by the way, the remains of 2 American citizens, Ite Chin and Omar Nutra. Hamas has made these hostages dig their own graves on camera. All of us desire peace, colleagues. All of us desire peace, but we should be united by one message for Hamas: release the hostages now and end this war. Hamas bears absolute responsibility for the ongoing war in Gaza. Hamas began a war on October 7, 2023, with a massacre of innocent people, including women, children, and the elderly. Unfortunately, while Israel has accepted the negotiators' proposals, Hamas has repeatedly rejected these reasonable offers to make peace. Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, members of this body rewarded Hamas for its horrible atrocities, including October 7th, by unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state. Hamas sees actions like that as winning, and as a win for them, and as a reward for their horrific actions. So rather than reward Hamas, this Council and all member states should pressure it to end the bloodshed, disarm, and give the people of Gaza a chance for a peaceful life. It is time to stop repeating this failed approach. President Trump's approach of peace through strength has yielded historic accomplishments in a very short amount of time. In his first term, he brought peace, prosperity, and regional integration through the historic Abraham Accords. Earlier this year, this administration negotiated a ceasefire that freed many hostages. And by holding Hamas accountable, we can free the hostages and end this war. The United States will continue to work on improving the humanitarian situation on the ground, supporting the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as it delivers life-saving aid to those in need without empowering the terrorists. The GHF continues to provide vital food aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, distributing now 175 meals as of September 8th. We also call on the Palestinian Authority to live up to its commitments at Oslo and condemn Hamas's terrorism consistently and unequivocally, to stop the incitement of terrorism and to fully implement its commitment to end the program of cash payments to terrorists and their families. Colleagues, a stable West Bank keeps Israel secure and is in line with this administration's goal to achieve peace in the region. The United States will continue to work tirelessly with Israel and our Arab partners to negotiate peace, get the hostages back, and create a brighter and more prosperous future for the region's people. Thank you.
Thank the representative of the United States for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席，我感谢阿拉克巴罗夫副特别协调员的通报。上周，在第80届联大一般性辩论、落实两国方案高级别会议等重要场合，国际社会就巴勒斯坦问题再次发出强有力的呼声，要求立即停止杀戮，拯救生命，实现和平。这是维护公道正义的最基本要求，更是人类道德良知的最基本底线。面对当前紧急局势，国际社会应当团结起来，凝聚共识，秉持客观公正立场，为解决巴勒斯坦问题做出更大的努力。我们要以最大的紧迫感平息加沙冲突。在近2年的冲突暴力和围困封锁之下，6.6万多名加沙民众失去了生命，200多万人在前所未有的人道灾难中挣扎。当前，以色列执意推进接管加沙城的计划，每天都有大量无辜平民丧生。中方重申，袭击平民和民用设施不可接受，把人道物资武器化不可接受，违背国际法和国际人道法不可接受。中方敦促以色列立即停止在加沙的一切军事行动，切实履行占领方义务，保障人道物资大规模、快速、安全进入，支持联合国等人道机构 开展援助。对以色列有特殊影响的国家应切实负起责任。我们要以有力的行动缓解约旦河西岸紧张局势。以色列持续扩张定居点政策，纵容定居者暴力，挤压巴勒斯坦人民生存空间，侵蚀两国方案基础。吞并西岸的危险企图将彻底葬送两国方案的前景，直接冲击中东地区的稳定。国际社会必须予以明确抵制和坚决反对。我们敦促以色列立即停止定居点活动，遏制定居者暴力，停止蚕食约旦河西岸领土，停止破坏巴勒斯坦民族权力机构的治理基础。我们要以坚定的决心重振两国方案。落实两国方案是解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行出路。以色列建国迄今已近80年，而巴勒斯坦人民仍无处安身，这种状况不可接受。独立建国是巴勒斯坦人民不可剥夺的民族权利，不是可有可无的施舍或奖励。加沙和西岸都是巴勒斯坦人民的家园，是巴勒斯坦领土的组成部分，不能成为国际政治的牺牲品。任何战后治理和重建安排都应当尊重巴勒斯坦人民的意愿，维护巴勒斯坦民族的正当权利。近期一些西方国家宣布承认巴勒斯坦国，国际社会应当延续积极势头，共同反对破坏两国方案基础的单边行动，寻求推进两国方案的切实可行路径，并支持巴勒斯坦成为联合国正式会员国。中方将继续同国际社会共同努力，推动早日平息加沙战火，缓解人道灾难，落实两国方案，推动巴勒斯坦问题全面、公正、持久解决，为实现中东地区的和平与稳定不断做出新的贡献。谢谢主席。
Representative of China for the statement. Now I give the floor to representative of United Kingdom.
Deputy Special Coordinator Alec Barov for his briefing. I'll make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom reaffirms that a two-state solution remains the only viable path to peace and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. That is why, last week, the UK formally recognised the State of Palestine. As my Foreign Secretary said, this decision reflects a grave urgency. The two-state solution is under threat from relentless violence, deepening humanitarian catastrophe, and political obstruction. In the West Bank, the Israeli government continues its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy, further destabilising the Palestinian Authority. So we urge Israel to release withheld clearance revenues, restore correspondent banking relationships, and facilitate shekel transfers from Palestinian banks. We also repeat our calls on Israel to halt the expansion of illegal settlements, including the E1 plans, and act decisively against extremist settler violence. Like others in this Council, we reiterate that Israeli annexation of the West Bank cannot be allowed to happen. Second, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is intolerable. Civilians continue to face famine, destruction, and displacement on a scale that defies description. Since the 1st of September, 4 hospitals in northern Gaza have been forced to close, and clinics, including those of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, continue to be struck by Israel. Israel must protect the healthcare sector in line with its obligations under international law. Last week, doctors who had worked in Gaza described to me the awful challenge of trying to save lives in conditions of destruction and with medical equipment and food withheld. So we continue to call on Israel to let in aid without restriction, including fully reopening the King Hussein Allenby Bridge. We also urge Israel to allow international media access to Gaza in line with the principles of press freedom. Third, as my Foreign Secretary said, recognition must be a spur, not a substitute, for urgent action. We desperately need a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and a huge surge in humanitarian aid. The hostages and Palestinians in Gaza have known only death and misery for the past 2 years. We commend the tireless efforts of the US, Qatar and Egypt to try to end this cycle of violence. The UK is ready to build on the positive momentum from last week's two-state solution conference and to play our part in securing a deal to provide a better future for Israel, Palestine and the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of United Kingdom for the statement. And now I give the floor to representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to begin by extending our gratitude to Mr. Alak Barov, Deputy Special Representative Coordinator, Resident Coordinator at the Office of the UN Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace Process, for his comprehensive and deeply troubling briefings on the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2334. Nearly 10 years after its passage, the Council's requirements remain unmet and in several critical respects are being actively disregarded. The ongoing expansion of Israeli settlement constitutes a clear breach of international law and remains a central impediment to the peace process. Over the past year, Israeli planning authorities have advanced or approved almost 10,000 new housing units in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and have proposed recognizing 22 additional settlement and outposts actions that deeply undermine the prospect of a viable and continuous Palestinian state. The resumption of a formal land registration in Area C, suspended since 1968, further entrenches settlement growth and increases the risk of unlawful sovereignty claims over occupied territories. Israel must stop the expansion of its illegal settlement on E1 zone. Furthermore, the demolition of over 450 Palestinian-owned structures and the displacement of nearly 600 people sharply highlight the trends that urgently need to be reversed. The recent report from the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights has identified more than 150 business enterprises, both Israeli and international, that are supporting the sustaining these illegal settlements. Such involvement complicates the occupation and presents a significant ethical and legal concerns. The recent report of the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights findings should inform the actions of the government and businesses alike, ensuring that they do not contribute on ongoing violations and breaches of international law. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza are catastrophic. Since the collapse of the ceasefire on March 18, more than 2 million people are facing a man-made famine, as confirmed by the Integrated Food Security Phase classification, a direct consequence of the ongoing blockade on aid. The hostilities have become intolerably severe, resulting in the death of at least 5,400 Palestinians and injuries to more than 70,300 others during this period. We pay solemn tribute to the United Nations personnel in Gaza, 323 of whom have lost their lives since October 7, including 43 in the last quarter alone, the highest toll of humanitarian workers in the UN history. Their dedication and sacrifices pursue of humanity and dignity and will not be forgotten. Mr. President, the path forward is clear. First, an immediate permanent ceasefire is essential to halt the bloodshed and avert the further famine. Somalia recognizes and appreciates the mediation effort led by Qatar, United States, and Egypt, and urges all parties and the broader international community to intensify efforts to achieve a sustained cessation of hostilities. Second, Israel must fulfill its obligation under international law and ensure the rapid and unembedded delivery of humanitarian and commercial goods into Gaza. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is strictly prohibited and represents a grave violation of international law. We also call for an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained. Third, Somalia underscores the necessity of reviving a credible, inclusive political process aimed at addressing the root cause and achieving a just and lasting peace. In that regard, our commitment to a sovereign and independent Palestinian state must be reaffirmed, and with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital, we welcome the recent declaration by an increasing number of states recognizing Palestine as a state, and we emphasize the importance of Palestine attaining full membership in the United Nations. The international community must act decisively to end the occupation and support Palestinian unity and governance, both of which are essential for a just and lasting peace. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Let me also thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov for his briefing. Mr. President, 1 week ago, world leaders convened for the high-level conference on the two-state solution. The vast majority reaffirmed their unwavering support for the lasting peace and the two-state solution. In the midst of this dark chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we saw a glimpse of hope, of momentum that we must dare to build on. This is why the Foreign Minister of Denmark announced last week that the keys to recognition of a Palestinian state will no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. Denmark welcomes the commitments made by President Abbas regarding democratic reform and condemnation of Hamas, confirming that they can have no role in Gaza. It's crucial that we seize this momentum to move forward on these commitments towards a viable and democratic Palestinian state. However, the two-state solution is at a critical junction. It's challenged by Israel's direct opposition to its realization, by the expansion of illegal settlements, and by threats to annex the West Bank and Gaza. Since our last briefing in June, Israel has approved the E1 settlement plan, a plan that will, if implemented, gravely undermine the two-state solution. Denmark strongly condemns this decision and urges Israel to halt any such attempt. We continue to see new expansions of settlements, widespread settler violence, forced displacement of local communities, and demolition orders of Palestinian-owned structures, including in East Jerusalem. Denmark's position is clear. We firmly condemn all of these actions and policies. Israeli settlements are a clear violation of international law, and they make it virtually impossible to form a connected and viable land for a future Palestinian state. Mr. President, there must also be concerted efforts to support the Palestinian Authority and its commitment to reform. Denmark remains greatly concerned by the PA's deteriorating financial situation. We have recently joined the Emergency Coalition for Palestine and have allocated approximately $8 million in additional support. We have also been at the forefront of EU support for capacity building and reform of the Palestinian authorities. We call on Israel to urgently release the withheld tax revenues it collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority and to renew the bank agreement. Mr. President, next week we are marking a devastating anniversary. We will never forget the brutal terror attack by Hamas on 7 October 2023. Just little over a week ago, another attack at the Allenby crossing, which we strongly condemn. But there can be no justification for terrorism, nor for the despicable maltreatment of the hostages. We have consistently stressed that Israel's response must be exercised in compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law, and we are now seeing that Israel's actions go far beyond self-defense. A man-made famine is unfolding. Denmark is deeply concerned by the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and it's deeply troubling that we now see reports of reduced, not improved, humanitarian access. We urge the government of Israel to provide authorization for international NGOs' operations in the OPT. They should not be forced to leave at a time when their services are needed more than ever. Mr. President, in closing, despite opposition and cynicism, last week provided new hope for a peaceful future for Israelis and Palestinians. For years, weapons and violence have spoken. Now is the time to implement the Resolution 2334 and for international law to prevail. Denmark remains committed to playing our part. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. Now I give the floor to representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramriz Alakbarov for presenting the report of the Secretary General on the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2334. It is deeply alarming that Israel not only fails to comply with the provisions of the resolution, but also continues to take active steps that directly violate its provisions. Mr. President, Israel continues to carry out its colonial settler policy unconstrained by the prescriptions of international law. This approach is particularly unsettling because of the implications for the achievement of an independent Palestinian state and the prospects for the termination of the Israeli occupation. This policy is evidenced by Israel's continued and systematic approval of new settlements in the occupied West Bank, increasingly shrinking the space pertaining to the Palestinian territory. The approval of the E1 settlement plan and Israel's determination to go forward with construction in the area is an extremely significant development that should not be met with silence from the Council. Advancing this plan would further fragment Palestinian communities and seriously undermine the aspiration for a contiguous Palestinian state. Israel itself has declared that the Palestinian state is being, and I quote, erased not by slogans, but by deeds, end quote. The response to this daring declaration by the occupying power and all other illegalities in the occupied Palestinian territory must be met with strong, decisive, and strategic action. Guyana therefore calls on fellow Council members to uphold the collective obligation to ensure that Israel complies fully with Resolution 2334. Israel's colonial settler policy is further evidenced by the settler attacks on Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Settlers also vandalize public infrastructure, including water networks and healthcare facilities. These acts are carried out under the watchful eyes of the Israeli security forces, who do nothing to stop them, but are quick to react by assaulting Palestinians who resist the unjust and illegal actions of settlers. Mr. President, a year has elapsed since the General Assembly issued its demand to Israel to end its occupation of the Palestinian territory, pursuant to the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. Guyana calls on Israel to relinquish the path of obstinacy and defiance in response to the loud calls of the international community, including the United Nations, for compliance with international law. We further call on Israel to cease all settlement activities and annexation plans, both for the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and for the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, Guyana is deeply disturbed by Israel's intransigence in persisting with its genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. As my President said to the General Assembly last week, what we are witnessing is not warfare, but mass extermination, carried out systematically and amounting to a war crime. The paralysis of the Security Council cannot persist, as this will be to the further detriment of the Palestinian nation. We therefore call for a consensus approach that involves action by all member states pursuant to Resolution 2334 to ensure that they do not in any way contribute to the implementation and perpetuation of Israel's settler colonial policies and practices. This approach must also involve urgent action by all member states to halt the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people. Mr. President, colleagues, it is baffling that the government of a people who have been the subject of discrimination and exclusion of the worst kind less than 100 years ago can now be the perpetrators of the same crime against another people, this time in full view of the world. Instead of changing the course of history, sadly, the occupying power has chosen to repeat it. But we, the international community, must ensure that the rule of international law prevails, not because enough of us hope that it will prevail, but because enough of us exercise the political will for it to prevail. As always, Guyana is prepared to support Council action to this end. I conclude by reiterating the following appeals. First, Guyana stresses the need for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, for the cessation of Israeli settlement policies and practices in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and for the cessation of violence against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank. Second, Guyana urges that steps be taken to rapidly improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. We call on the Israeli authorities to allow humanitarian access in all parts of the Strip, to lift restrictions on the types of supplies allowed in, and to allow the UN and humanitarian partners to fully resume their operations. The situation of famine in Gaza can and must be reversed. Third, we call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages who continue to be held in Gaza by Hamas and other armed groups. Likewise, we call for the release of Palestinian civilians, including children, who are detained in Israeli prisons without charge. Mr. President, Guyana remains unwavering in its support to the Palestinian cause and the implementation of the two-state solution. We remain ready to work with the Council and the wider UN towards this end and are particularly encouraged by the many demonstrations of solidarity with the Palestinian people during High Level Week. We believe that there is great international momentum and commitment to resolving the question of Palestine with urgency, and we, the members of the Security Council, must collectively take full advantage of this momentum. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je remercie Monsieur le coordonnateur spécial adjoint pour le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient, Monsieur Ramiz Alakbarov, pour son exposé. La question israélo-palestinienne est au cœur des tensions de la région depuis des décennies, et il est du devoir de ce Conseil de la traiter sans relâche. Dans une semaine, nous commémorerons le sinistre anniversaire des 2 ans des attaques terroristes commises par le Hamas le 7 octobre 2023 et des prises d'otages qui s'en sont suivies. Actes barbares, d'ampleur inégalée, qui ont ébranlé par leur sauvagerie Israël et la conscience du monde. La France réitère sa condamnation sans équivoque des crimes odieux commis par le Hamas. Notre priorité absolue demeure la conclusion d'un cessez-le-feu immédiat et permanent et la libération sans condition de tous les otages. Mais voici aussi 2 ans que notre Conseil se réunit vainement pour appeler au cessez-le-feu et à l'accès humanitaire sans restriction pour tous les habitants de Gaza. Les offensives israéliennes en cours à Gaza n'ont plus de logique militaire. La France réitère sa condamnation de leur extension et de leur intensification. La tragédie des Palestiniens de Gaza a trop duré. Cette guerre destructrice ne doit pas nous faire oublier les dangereuses dynamiques à l'œuvre en Cisjordanie. À cet égard, je souhaiterais rappeler 3 points d'attention majeurs pour la France. Tout d'abord, la validation par Israël du projet de colonie E1 à l'est de Jérusalem. Ce projet couperait la Cisjordanie en deux et porterait gravement atteinte à la solution à 2 États. La France appelle Israël à y renoncer de toute urgence. Deuxièmement, les multiplications des attaques de colons israéliens contre des Palestiniens dans un climat d'impunité totale. La France appelle Israël à mettre immédiatement fin à ces violences et à protéger les civils palestiniens. Troisièmement, l'intensification des démolitions par Israël d'infrastructures publiques essentielles. Elle contribue également à cette dynamique délétère, comme cette école, détruite en août dans le nord de la Cisjordanie. Elle avait été financée par l'Agence française pour le développement en lien avec l'Union européenne, et la France demande des explications à Israël sur cette démolition. Ces dynamiques, alimentées par un vote de la Knesset et les propos inacceptables de ministres israéliens appelant à l'annexion de la Cisjordanie, sont dangereuses à double titre. Elles constituent une violation flagrante du droit international. Elles vont à l'encontre de l'intérêt d'Israël, compromettant sa sécurité de long terme et éloignant toute perspective de coexistence pacifique entre Israéliens et Palestiniens, mais aussi toute perspective de paix régionale, menaçant les accords de paix existants et à venir entre Israël et ses voisins. La France continuera de s'opposer fermement à toute forme d'annexion des territoires palestiniens, qui constitue une ligne rouge pour la communauté internationale. La France est pleinement mobilisée aux côtés de ses partenaires européens pour accroître la pression sur Israël afin de mettre fin à la colonisation et à toutes les violences qu'elle suscite. Cela passe notamment par l'adoption de nouvelles sanctions contre les individus et entités qui en sont responsables. Monsieur le Président, dans ce paysage bien sombre, une lueur d'espoir existe pourtant. La semaine dernière s'est tenue ici à New York la conférence pour la solution à 2 États, coprésidée par l'Arabie saoudite et la France. Cette conférence a permis à la communauté internationale de réaffirmer son soutien ferme et continu à la solution à 2 États. Elle a permis aussi d'insuffler une dynamique politique inédite, en dessinant un chemin clair vers la paix et la sécurité pour tous dans la région. Elle a été l'occasion pour la France, avec 9 autres États, d'annoncer la reconnaissance de l'État de Palestine. La déclaration de New York, endossée par 142 États membres de l'ONU, dresse une feuille de route unique pour y parvenir. Approuvée par l'autorité palestinienne, elle prévoit notamment un cessez-le-feu immédiat et permanent à Gaza et la libération de tous les otages. Le désarmement effectif du Hamas et son exclusion de la gouvernance de Gaza, où une administration de transition doit être mise en place, intégrant l'autorité palestinienne. Rappelons à cet égard qu'il est difficile de présenter comme un appui au Hamas une conférence qui l'exclut de l'avenir de la Palestine et qui vise cette solution à 2 États que le Hamas, justement, a toujours refusée. Troisièmement, le déploiement d'une mission internationale de stabilisation à Gaza et la reconstruction de l'enclave. Enfin, l'établissement d'un État palestinien doté d'une gouvernance et d'institutions réformées. Nous comprenons que les contacts entre le président des États-Unis et plusieurs États de la région la semaine dernière ont également fait progresser l'engagement au service d'une paix durable. Monsieur le Président, la paix est possible, mais elle suppose de la part du Hamas de libérer immédiatement les otages encore détenus à Gaza. Elle suppose aussi de la part d'Israël d'accepter la main tendue par la communauté internationale et de s'engager de bonne foi sur le chemin des 2 États. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. Now I give the floor to representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Alakbarov, for his briefing. Unsurprisingly, the briefing paints a grim picture of a dangerous trajectory of the conflict. Colleagues, during the past week, world leaders gathered here at the United Nations. Palestine and the horrors of Gaza dominated all discussions. It started with a conference on the 2-state solution, which created a positive momentum that was further strengthened by the meeting of the US President with Arab leaders. All these happened in parallel with almost consensual messages coming from the General Assembly that the suffering in Gaza must end. As the general debate wraps up, we have an opportunity for reflection and for charting the course of action. Today, Mr. President, I would like to offer our reflection on partnership for peace. First, for Slovenia, the Palestinian Authority is a crucial partner for peace. While supporting the reform process, we underline that the PA must remain stable and able to govern, provide basic services, and maintain security. We are deeply alarmed over their financial crisis, and we urge the Israeli government to release the Palestinian revenues that Israel is withholding unlawfully. Slovenia has joined the Emergency Coalition for the Financial Sustainability of the Palestinian Authority and allocated funds towards this end. However, this is only an emergency measure. Ensuring the sustainability and functionality of the Palestinian Authority remains a priority. Second, UNRWA is another partner for peace in the region. It is a lifeline for Palestinians struggling with the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. It is a pillar for human development in the West Bank and more broadly. We remain steadfast in our support to the agency and the shared commitments we pledged. The agency is an indispensable part of the fibre of Palestine society and is enjoying trust of the community. It is accumulating knowledge, offering opportunities, and carrying political heritage. As such, it must be protected and its mandate renewed. Third, what is becoming clear is that partnerships for peace in the region of the Middle East and in the international community are growing. The leaders of the region have clearly demonstrated their commitment to peace in the region, to peace with Israel. As part of the commitment of the international community to peace, we welcome the new and irreversible wave of recognitions of Palestinian statehood. Each one strengthens legitimacy of Palestine and moves us closer to a just settlement. The international community is making its voice clear, and we resolutely stand behind the New York Declaration outlining steps to peace. Colleagues, I want to underline that we also hear voices for peace in Israel. We hear families of hostages calling for ceasefire. We hear voices of so many Israelis understanding that their safety and future is intertwined with safety and future of Palestinians. We hear Jewish voices around the globe emphasizing that peace cannot be achieved through war. To these voices and to others, I want to once again repeat our condemnation of the 7 October terror attack. Hamas is not a partner for peace. Hamas and its terror ideology has no place in the future of Gaza. Mr. President, Slovenia is deeply alarmed by the surge of violence in the West Bank. We oppose announcements regarding further expansion of settlement projects, including the E1 project. We are alarmed by the attempts to fragment Palestinian communities and movements restrictions. We call for the compliance with the ICJ advisory opinion. We call for an end to the occupation. Slovenia has taken concrete measures against settlements, as well as against the war in Gaza. Our position on it has equally been clear, and I repeat our call for an immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire, the unconditional and dignified release of all hostages, and for unhindered humanitarian assistance in Gaza in line with humanitarian principles. Thank you.
The representative of Slovenia for the statement. Now I give the floor to representative of Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente. Me complace, en primer lugar, dar la más cordial bienvenida a los nuevos representantes permanentes de la República de Corea y de Estados Unidos, y a la vez aprovechar para hacer un merecido reconocimiento y felicitar a todo el equipo de la misión de Corea por su admirable gestión en la presidencia del Consejo durante este mes de septiembre. Panamá agradece al señor Alakbarov, coordinador especial adjunto para el proceso de paz del Oriente Medio, por su presentación, cuyo sombrío contenido no debe ni puede sorprendernos. De igual manera, saludamos a la presencia de las delegaciones de Israel y el Estado Observador de Palestina, que nos distinguen con su participación. La resolución 2334 de 2016 reafirma principios fundamentales para alcanzar la anhelada paz al prolongado conflicto israelí-palestino, la inadmisibilidad de la adquisición de territorio por la fuerza, la ilegalidad de los asentamientos y la urgencia de alcanzar una solución política. 9 años después, desde su adopción, se advierte justamente lo contrario: la consolidación de hechos consumados sobre el terreno, la expansión y el agravamiento de la violencia. La consecuencia es un conflicto estancado en la lógica y opción belicista, que solo ha sembrado resentimientos que han cosechado extremismos y violencia cada vez más trágica. Gaza es hoy la evidencia más cruda de lo que ocurre cuando se posterga una solución política y se normaliza la violencia y los extremismos. La catástrofe humanitaria alcanza allí proporciones injustificables. Y no solo por ello justifica, sino que exige la atención permanente y constante de este Consejo de Seguridad. En la última semana, más de 350 palestinos han perdido la vida y cerca de 1.500 han resultado heridos. En total, más de 65.000 palestinos han muerto en esta guerra, iniciada por Hamás desde los atroces ataques del 7 de octubre que condenamos enérgicamente otra vez. La hambruna que había quedado evidenciada por agencias de Naciones Unidas, así como por destacadas cadenas internacionales de comunicación y en redes sociales, ya ha sido confirmada por la clasificación integrada de la seguridad alimentaria y ha cobrado 440 vidas, incluidos 147 niños. El cierre del cruce de Sikkim, al norte de la franja, desde el 12 de septiembre, ha reducido en 50.000 comidas diarias la asistencia, una fracción mínima frente al hambre desbordada. Mientras la UNICEF ha advertido que los niños están literalmente desfalleciendo ante nuestros ojos. Ningún objetivo militar justifica convertir el alimento en un método de opresión y control. Señor presidente, en Cisjordania, incluida Jerusalén Occidental, la situación también contradice el espíritu y el mandato de la resolución 2334. Desde octubre de 2023, casi 1.000 palestinos han muerto. Más de 3.500 estructuras han sido destruidas y más de 3.000 personas han sido desplazadas. Nuevas restricciones de acceso aíslan comunidades enteras, mientras la violencia y el vandalismo, incluido el sabotaje a redes de agua, buscan hacer inviable la vida cotidiana de miles de personas. Esta realidad no construye seguridad, por el contrario, atenta contra cualquier posibilidad de paz. Panamá reitera que no existe salida militar a este conflicto. Décadas de guerra y muerte no han producido ni producirán seguridad, ni mucho menos paz. Insistir en la vía militar es insistir en el fracaso. La única vía es un proceso político serio, integral y sostenido, basado en el derecho internacional, en las resoluciones de este Consejo, con garantías verificables para ambas partes y que, como resultado de negociaciones diplomáticas, asegure a israelíes y palestinos vivir bajo seguridad y dignidad en dos estados con fronteras mutuamente reconocidas e internacionalmente acordadas. En lo inmediato, como medidas impostergables, pedimos un alto al fuego permanente, la liberación digna e incondicional de todos los rehenes y el acceso de la vital ayuda humanitaria de manera segura y sin restricciones en toda Gaza. En ese sentido, reafirmamos nuestro respaldo pleno a la participación de las agencias de Naciones Unidas, que cuentan con experiencia comprobada, legitimidad y capacidad para llevar asistencia de manera segura, imparcial y eficaz a la población civil. Panamá pide que cese la violencia y las acciones que no aportan solución en Cisjordania y Jerusalén Oriental y que contradicen abiertamente el derecho internacional y las resoluciones de este Consejo y que solo alejan la posibilidad de una solución política sostenible. Señor Presidente, insistir en la vía de la violencia, en la fuerza y en los extremos es insistir en el dolor. Cada día sin paz es un día más que pesa sobre nuestra conciencia colectiva. Optar por la vía política es insistir en la vida, en la dignidad y en la seguridad de dos pueblos que merecen vivir en paz y seguridad. Renunciar a la paz sería renunciar a la dignidad que nos une como humanidad. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. Now I give the floor to representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. This past week gave new impetus to our engagement on the situation in the Middle East, giving us reason to hope even as challenges persist. Co-chaired by the President of France and the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, the high-level conference for the two-state solution made global headlines, reaffirming the collective resolve of the international community for two states living side by side in peace and security. We welcomed the clear and unequivocal statement of the President of the Palestinian Authority condemning the terrorism of Hamas, and we were encouraged by the expressed Palestinian resolve to assure that Hamas will have no role in the governance of Gaza in the day after. Against this backdrop, we believe the path charted by the New York Declaration must be explored and implemented thoroughly. Of course, challenges remain grave. Recent settlement expansion and settler violence in the West Bank, including against Christian communities, is a cause for equally grave alarm and further impair the prospects for peace. They need to stop now. In particular, announcements on the construction of additional settlements in the E1 area are of profound concern. Such plans, were they to be realized, would further undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation remains grave in Gaza. Many world leaders took the floor to decry the profound humanitarian suffering, reminding us all that the world is watching. The civilian population of the Gaza Strip has endured conditions unsustainable and deeply concerning. Meanwhile, the expansion of military operations in Gaza City has led to further displacement, risking to worsen an already dire humanitarian crisis. In particular, the plight of children underscores the urgent need to guarantee safe, unhindered, and sustained humanitarian access at scale. As my Prime Minister has underlined, the most urgent priority now is to stop the unnecessary killing and ensure a large-scale and sustainable delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing and medicines must be guaranteed, while international humanitarian law must be respected. Initiatives such as the Jordanian Air Corridor and the Cyprus-led Amalthea Maritime Initiative should be further strengthened in this regard. Mr. President, colleagues, at the same time, hostages remain in the hands of Hamas. We do not forget them. We do not forget the atrocious 7th of October. We reiterate our call for their unconditional release. They must be freed without delay. Despite this bleak reality, we are encouraged by recent and ongoing efforts to chart a path forward, one that would allow for the release of all hostages and the cessation of hostilities, as well as ensuring the long-term security, dignity, and prosperity of the peoples of Gaza who must stay in their land. We welcome the leadership and initiative demonstrated by the U.S. President this past week and look forward to the next steps. As a member of the Security Council and a long-standing partner to both Israelis and Palestinians, Greece stands ready to contribute actively to the collective work that lies ahead. Mr. President, the members of the international community, despite all nuances and differentiations, stood united this past week, especially in calling for the hostages to be released and for the war to end. A new dawn for Israelis and Palestinians can be on the horizon, should there be the courage to reach for it. The two-state solution of both peoples living side by side in peace and security remains the only viable path forward. This past week, the international community threw its full weight behind it. Now is the time for it to be realized. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. Now I give the floor to Pakistan.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would like to also welcome you to our UN family. We thank Deputy Special Coordinator, Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, for his briefing. That account is a vivid description of how such a primordial resolution as 2334 remains far from implemented and continues to be violated with impunity. It is therefore right for this Council to have this periodic review in accordance with Resolution 2334. President, this Council meets at the close of the high-level week of the 80th General Assembly session, where an overwhelming number of world leaders stressed one overriding imperative: to end the war in Gaza and to achieve a just and lasting peace in Palestine and the region. The message from the Assembly was clear, and it must be heard clearly in this chamber also. Mr. President, for over 2 years, the Council has been seized with the unbearable tragedy unfolding in Gaza and the rest of the Palestinian territory. Yet, with every passing day, the suffering deepens. As our Prime Minister said last week, the plight of the Palestinian people is one of the most heart-wrenching tragedies of our times. More than 66,000 Palestinians have been killed, the vast majority of women and children. Gaza is not only being bombed from the sky, its people are being starved on the ground. Homes, schools, and hospitals have been reduced to rubble. The expansion of military operations in Gaza City is a catastrophe before our eyes, risking the forced displacement of nearly 1 million people who have no safe refuge left. In the West Bank, the picture is equally alarming. Systematic military operations, illegal settlements, and forced displacement are extinguishing the very prospect of a two-state solution. The E1 settlement plan is a direct assault on the two-state framework, threatening to sever East Jerusalem from Palestinian areas and dismantle the contiguity of the West Bank. Such policies are not only unjust, they are unlawful. They violate international law and Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334, which declared settlements illegal and demanded an immediate halt. Yet, instead of compliance, we see defiance and acceleration of the settlement activity, as also we heard in the briefing this morning. If the Council cannot enforce its own decisions, its credibility will be in jeopardy. Mr. President, there are nonetheless glimmers of hope. Pakistan welcomes the two-state solution conference, co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, and the recent recognitions of the State of Palestine by several member states. These are principled steps representing a positive momentum which must be matched by substance. We value the initiative of President Donald Trump working with 8 Arab and OIC countries to advance peace through concrete measures. As a participant in this consultation process, Pakistan will closely engage and play a constructive role in promoting consensus. Our aim is to ensure that these efforts contribute meaningfully to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people and to achieving a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace consistent with UN resolutions and international legitimacy, leading to Palestinian statehood. Ensuring full ownership of the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority will be vital for any process. We therefore call for, first, an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire to halt the carnage in Gaza. Second, the lifting of the blockade and unimpeded humanitarian access alongside the release of hostages and Palestinian prisoners. Third, a categorical end to forced displacement and settlement activity while upholding the right of return of refugees under international law. A firm no to any designs for annexation either in Gaza or the West Bank. Fourth, practical, time-bound measures to ensure the full implementation of Resolution 2334 and to preserve the viability of the two-state solution. Fifth, the urgent launch of a credible, irreversible political process leading to a sovereign, contiguous, and viable state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds, Al-Sharif as its capital. President, the people of Palestine cannot wait. The cause of peace and the credibility of this Council depends on what we do in this moment. Pakistan will continue to stand with the people of Palestine and to work with Council members and other partners towards a just and lasting peace for all in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
السيد الرئيس، بداية أتوجه بجزيل الشكر إلى السيد رامز الأكبروف نائب المنسق الخاص لعملية السلام في الشرق الأوسط على إحاطته، إحاطة عرضت بوضوح لا لبس فيه مأساوية الواقع في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة، وكشفت عجز هذا المجلس عن ضمان تنفيذ القرار 2334 بما يفضح حالة الشلل التي تصيبه كلما تعلق الأمر بفرض الامتثال لقراراته بشأن القضية الفلسطينية حتى يوشك أن يفقد ما بقي من مصداقيته. السيد الرئيس، في غزة يتسع الجرح الفلسطيني كما تتسع الآلام والمآسي، آلام ومآس خلفها احتلال همجي لم يعدم وسيلة ذكرت في كتب الطغاة إلا أوقعها على الشعب الفلسطيني، حتى صار الموت فيها أمنية ترجى لا هاجسا يخشى. يقتل الناس فيها في أطفالهم وفي آبائهم وفي أحبابهم وفي كل ما كان يوما رمزا للحياة، حيث صار الموت رفيق الإنسان. فالفلسطينيون يعيشون الموت لكنه موت بلا موت. الأرقام المروعة عن معاناة الغزيين تمتلئ بها التقارير، ولا ينكرها أو يشكك بها إلا من كان مشاركا في الجريمة. يكفي القول أن الاحتلال جعل من غزة أسوأ مكان يعيش فيه الإنسان، أسوأ مكان يعيش فيه الأطفال والنساء والشباب والشيوخ، وأسوأ مكان يعمل فيه الصحفيون والأطباء والعاملون الإنسانيون. غزة اليوم بفعل آلة القتل والدمار الإسرائيلية هي أسوأ مكان يولد فيه إنسان على وجه الأرض، ومع ذلك يظل أهلها أوفياء لأرضهم متمسكين بها، يواجهون القهر بالإصرار، لأنها غزة مدينة لا تشبه غيرها من المدن، أرض تتحدث لغة ولن يدركها ولن يفهمها المحتل. أما هذا المجلس المكلف بصون السلم والأمن الدوليين يجتمع المرة تلو الأخرى ليناقش الوضع بفلسطين المحتلة من دون أن يتمكن من اتخاذ قرار حازم، ليخرج بعدها بعار مضاعف: عار العجز عن وضع الحد للإبادة، عار العجز عن فرض وقف إطلاق النار، عار العجز عن مواجهة المجاعة وإدخال المساعدات وإغاثة الإنسان، عار العجز عن فرض احترام القانون الدولي. فمتى سيتحمل هذا المجلس مسؤولياته ويرتقي للأمانة التي يحملها؟ ومتى سيستجيب هذا المجلس لأصوات الملايين تملأ شوارع العالم نداء بإنهاء مأساة غزة؟ السيد الرئيس، ولأن الضفة الغربية وغزة صنوان في الجسد الفلسطيني الواحد، تعاقب بدورها، لأنها تذكر المحتل بأصحاب الحق، تذكره بأصحاب الأرض، يذيقها الاحتلال من ذات الكأس سعيا منه لتحقيق هدفه الأكبر: وأد المشروع الوطني الفلسطيني. الضم بالضفة الغربية بلغ مستويات غير مسبوقة. الاستيطان ينهش جسد الضفة، يقطع أوصالها ويعزل القدس الشريف عن محيطه الفلسطيني الطبيعي. إرهاب المستوطنين المحمي والمغطى من سلطات الاحتلال بلغ درجات خطيرة. الأقصى الشريف يدنسه المستوطنون في كل حين، ويتبجح مسؤولو الاحتلال كل يوم بأنه لن تكون هناك دولة فلسطينية، لاهثين وراء سراب ووهم إسرائيل الكبرى، في تحد سافر للقانون الدولي وللقرارات الصادرة عن هذا المجلس. فإلى متى؟ إلى متى تبقى أفعال الاحتلال على الأرض تقابل بالتصريحات؟ وإلى متى يغض الطرف عن انتهاكاته؟ وإلى متى يظل القانون الدولي كلمات لا وقع لها عندما يكون المعني هو المحتل الإسرائيلي؟ أم أن البعض قد تعود على هذا الواقع البئيس وتعايش معه؟ إن علينا واجبا لا منا، لا سيما في هذا المجلس، أن نتحرك لتمكين الفلسطينيين، تمكينهم من حقهم الطبيعي والقانوني في أرضهم وإقامة دولتهم، قبل أن لا يبقى شعب يقيم دولة فلسطين بفعل الإبادة والتهجير القسري، وقبل أن لا تبقى أرض تقام عليها دولة فلسطين بفعل الضم والاستيطان. السيد الرئيس، إن الديناميكية التي عرفتها القضية الفلسطينية مؤخرا مع توالي الاعترافات والمبادرات الداعية إلى حل عادل ودائم ستبقى قاصرة ما لم تنتقل من منطق القول إلى منطق الفعل، ومن منطق الاستجداء إلى منطق الإرغام، ومن منطق الإقناع إلى منطق العقاب. من هذا المنطلق تتطلع الجزائر بأمل يخالطه الحذر إلى المفاوضات الدائرة حاليا، ونرجو أن تفضي إلى نتيجة إيجابية تنهي مأساة غزة، تنهي مأساة فلسطين، وتضمن توقف العدوان. ونشدد على أنه يجب على المجموعة الدولية أن تضمن تنفيذ أي مخرج إلى منتهاه حتى لا نكرر أخطاء الماضي ونجد أنفسنا مرة أخرى أمام التزامات لا تحترم واتفاقات تخترق من قبل المحتل الإسرائيلي. كما تشدد الجزائر على أن أي اتفاق حتى يحقق غايته لا بد أن يكون منطلقه وهدفه هو إنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأرض الفلسطينية. فالحقيقة واضحة، لا يمكن التعايش مع الاحتلال، والشعوب لا تنسى حقوقها مهما طال الزمن. السيد الرئيس، إن الحل واضح ولم يعد يحتمل المزيد من التسويف: إقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشريف، حل توافقت عليه المجموعة الدولية منذ عقود، وهذا أوان التنفيذ. هذا هو السبيل الوحيد إلى سلام فلسطين، وهذا هو مفتاح استقرار الشرق الأوسط. شكرا.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement. Now I shall make a statement in my capacity of the representative of Republic of Korea. First of all, I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barov for his briefing. We still remember the horror that shocked the whole world on October 7th, 2023. One peaceful Saturday morning in southern Israel was marked by one of the most horrific terrorist attacks in modern history. The Republic of Korea reiterates its condemnation on attacks by Hamas against Israel. Israel has the right to protect itself and its citizens. However, this right must be carried out in accordance with international humanitarian law, including principles of proportionality, distinction, and precaution. Civilians, notably including children, aid workers, journalists, and medical personnel, must all be protected. The Republic of Korea remains deeply concerned that for the last 2 years, these fundamental principles have not been adequately observed in this war, and urges parties to this conflict to strictly abide by their obligations under the international law. We are dismayed by the ongoing expansion of Israel's ground operation in Gaza City and repeated evacuation orders. We are particularly concerned by the repetitive strikes against hospitals in Gaza. Earlier this month, by participating as co-pen holders and voting in favor of the E10 draft resolution on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, the Republic of Korea called with the vast majority of the international community for an immediate ceasefire, release of all hostages, and an urgent surge of humanitarian aid in Gaza. Despite the E10 initiative failing, we still remain hopeful that the negotiations can come closer to securing a ceasefire and the release of hostages through the selfless mediation effort by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt. We call on all parties to prioritize the immense suffering of both Palestinian civilians and Israeli hostages in Gaza, and faithfully engaged with mediators. Turning to the worsening situation in the West Bank, the Republic of Korea reiterates its position as affirmed in Resolution 2334. The establishment of the settlement in the occupied Palestinian territory has no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation under international law. We are also alarmed by the repetitive rhetoric made by Israel's senior officials, clearly rejecting the guiding vision of the two-state solution the common aspirations shared by both regional countries and the overwhelming majority of the international community. The Republic of Korea reiterates its firm support for the two-state solution as the only viable path for genuine peace and security in the region. We note the Palestinian Authority's remark delivered last week at the General Assembly, reaffirming its commitment to the two-state solution and living side by side in peace with its neighbor. We call on Israel to do the same. Thus, we urge Israel, as provided in Resolution 2334, to cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory and to divert its direction to peace and coexistence. We support a revitalized and reformed Palestinian Authority as the sole legitimate representative of Palestinian people both in West Bank and Gaza. We'll call for lifting all measures hampering the economic viability of the PA, including withholding clearance revenues. Resolution 2334, adopted 9 years ago, remains a true cornerstone document encompassing all key principles toward coexistence in dignity based on the two-state solution. We hope neighbors in the Middle East will recommit to peace, stability, and coexistence. Ending the war in Gaza will be certainly the meaningful step to achieve this goal. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Several colleagues made reference to a purported genocide. The United States notes these allegations are categorically false, baseless, and fuel anti-Semitic hate and violence around the world. Even more disturbingly, one member state today made an allusion to the Holocaust. The United States underscores the offensive nature of these comments, which distort history and are a disgrace to all those who perished in the Holocaust and to all of the victims of Hamas's October 7th attack, which was itself the worst massacre of Jews since the horrors of the Holocaust. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to a permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to welcome you to the United Nations and to extend to you and to your delegation my commitment and the commitment of my delegation to continue the close cooperation between our two sides. As we say in Arabic, ahlan wa sahlan, welcome. I also want to express our gratitude for the briefing of Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, Deputy Special Coordinator, for reporting on the quarterly report of the Secretary General as was determined in Resolution 2334. Of course, that resolution is related to the illegality of settlement activities by the occupying power in the occupied land of the State of Palestine. And we are grateful to the Secretary General for continuing his reporting on quarterly basis as has been required by him in the Resolution 2334. Mr. President, Palestine will not disappear. But every day, children, women, men, entire families disappear. Communities are uprooted. Neighborhoods are turned to dust. Lives are shattered. Land is grabbed. homes are demolished. This is the dark reality of life in Palestine under Israel's illegal occupation. We have a duty to bring this suffering to an end, collective duty, and to do it in a way that leads to an end of the occupation and conflict once and for all, so our people never experience such pain and loss again, and all peoples can live in peace and security. We have been confronted as a nation with the denial of our rights, with an attempt that continues to this day to push us out of geography and history, to deny our existence, our belonging to the land, our rights as human beings and as a people. All peoples are endowed with a certain rights, known as inalienable rights, and our people are not less worthy and are not less entitled to them. The Palestinian people have a right to life, to liberty, to security, and to dignity. The reality our people continue to endure is one of death and devastation, dispossession and colonization, despair and displacement. But this reality is man-made. Let me repeat, it is man-made, occupation-made. It is neither their fate nor a fatality. It can be unmade. We hope and pray and work relentlessly for an end of the genocide today. And that is the most sacred goal, given the horrors every day brings upon 2 million people. But tomorrow matters as well. And what we need is not a pause in the violence and injustice, but an end to it. Violence is an impasse. It must not be fueled nor tolerated. It must be stopped. And we will not relent in our rejection of violence against civilians, Palestinians and Israelis. This is a legal, political, moral principle we will not abandon. Likewise, injustice must never be justified or shielded by anyone under any circumstances. It should never be justified. It must be brought to an end. Mr. President, Palestine is committed to peace. We are the ones who need it most in the midst of these unimaginable horrors. And peace needs to be a shared objective to become a shared reality. We are translating that commitment to peace in our actions every day. In the face of unhinged Israeli militarism, Palestine has chosen pacifism. Our part of the world does not need more death and destruction. It needs peace. Freedom will lead to peace, and peace will lead to shared security and prosperity. This is the path we must embark on. Had Resolution 2334 been implemented, had the ICJ advisory opinion on the illegality of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, had been upheld, peace would be a reality today. Mr. President, over the course of the last week, the entire world rallied around clear objectives. It was a high-level week mainly on Palestine. We thank the great majority of UN membership who made it so. We thank you all. You made history last week. From countries that recognized the state of Palestine, to those who adopted measures to end the war and occupation, to those who pledged their political and financial and humanitarian support, to those who pledged protection to end the famine and stop the massacres, to the countries that gathered at the International Peace Conference co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France and endorsed the New York Declaration and took part in the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, the world mobilized for an end of the war on the Palestinian people, for an independent and sovereign Palestinian state, for the two-state solution. This initial part has been accomplished, and thank you to all of you. Now we roll our sleeves and get ready for what needs to be done. We have a historic document, the New York Declaration and the Annex, and we have a leadership structure led by Saudi Arabia and France and 17 other important countries from all the continents, from the Arab nations, from the OIC, from Africa, from Asia, from the Europeans, from North and South America. We have the structure, we have the roadmap, we need the full implementation. And we have the 142 countries that endorsed it. We needed to make it a reality. All of it in totality. All of it in totality, because it addresses all important and sensitive issues to all of us and to the two parties. So the time and the new journey for the implementation is just beginning. The world mobilized for peace. President Trump assembled leaders from the region to push for an end of the war and to advance peace, to stop the bloodshed, to release the hostages and prisoners, to end the famine, to bring peace. President Trump also expressed clear rejection of annexation, which we welcome. We reiterate Palestine's readiness to work with President Trump and the U.S. administration, with Saudi Arabia and regional actors, with European partners and the members of this distinguished Security Council, with the entire international community. We do not want to leave anyone behind that can contribute in a positive way for the accomplishment of the two-state solution. In the pursuit of these objectives, of the independence of the State of Palestine, the realization of the rights of our people, and just and lasting peace in our region. To work together for shared peace, shared security, and shared prosperity. The decisions we make today will determine the fate of the peoples of the region for generations to come and the face of the Middle East for decades. Let us not delay a single minute more in doing what is necessary for this just peace to replace the unbearable reality of today. We owe peace to those who have endured in their flesh the scourge of war. Let us not fail those who can still save. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I wish to extend my congratulations to you and to Ambassador Waltz and convey my best wishes for your success. I would like to thank Deputy Special Coordinator Mr. Alakbarov for his briefing. Mr. President, we have just come through a week of speeches, theater, and spectacle. Now it is a time to step away from the stage and face reality. Prime Minister Netanyahu, as we speak, is meeting President Trump in order to discuss regional issues with a clear mission to bring our hostages home and make sure that Hamas can never again threaten Israel or exploit the people of Gaza. Mr. President, despite threats from Hamas, more than 80% of Gaza City's population has moved south, while our forces continue to dismantle terrorist strongholds. Humanitarian aid efforts continue with the support of different agencies and NGOs. The Mawasi area can accommodate those coming from the north, and on average, 250 to 300 aid trucks are unloaded in Gaza each day. Council members, picture this. Men sit in the dark, machinery hums, sparks fly, steel pipes are cut and pieces are fitted together. They are not making furniture, they are not building machines, they are not shaping tools, they are building rockets. Weapons aimed at families, schools and cities. Dozens of parts, 2 already assembled, pointing toward an Israeli town, explosives ready to be packed. Imagine our forces that move in just in time, seizing the site and dismantling the rockets just minutes before they could be fired. Do you know where this happened? Do you know when? In Gaza? In Yemen? In Lebanon? No, not Gaza, not Yemen, not Lebanon. It happened in Judea and Samaria, just last week, in a village near Ramallah. Only days later, another rocket was found near Tulkarem, another city in Judea and Samaria. It was so unstable that bomb disposal teams had to neutralize it. Let me paint a clearer picture. That first workshop was only 12.5 miles from Jerusalem. That is about the same distance as from the Eiffel Tower to the Palace of Versailles. The rocket near Tulkarem was only about 15 miles from the city of Netanya on Israel's coast, a similar distance to that between central London and Heathrow Airport. These are not far-off threats. They are weapons built within minutes of Israeli towns and cities, hidden workshops of death right on our doorstep. The same methods began in Gaza 20 years ago. It started exactly like that. Small workshops turned out rockets, and many chose to look away. But we know what happened. Those rockets multiplied into thousands, raining down on Israeli towns for years. We have learned the cost of failing to eradicate terror immediately at its source. That same danger now rises in Judea and Samaria, workshops preparing rockets and weapons just miles from our cities. Council members, you can bury your head in the sand or you can confront it. Israel does not have the luxury of ignoring it. We will confront terror. Those who turned a blind eye to Gaza 2 decades ago now see the results. We will not repeat that mistake in Judea and Samaria. Neither should this council. The terror threat in Judea and Samaria is real and imminent. These terror networks put Israeli lives directly at risk. Yet, just last week, President Macron, in an interview in CBS, he claimed, and I quote, "There is no Hamas in the West Bank." Better check again. Earlier this month, Hamas claimed responsibility for the attack at a crowded bus stop in Jerusalem where 2 Hamas terrorists murdered 6 innocent Israelis. In June, our forces uncovered 2 major Hamas infrastructures in Hebron and Bethlehem. Under Operation Iron Wall, we arrested 600 weapons. We destroyed 15 observation posts and 20 weapon workshops. And we arrested 70 Hamas terrorists in the Hebron region alone. In November 2024, Israeli forces stopped an Iranian shipment of rockets, bombs, rifles, and launchers headed for terrorists in Jenin. Yes, Iran is there too, in Judea and Samaria, arming, funding, and coordinating terror. These are the facts. So to those who question whether there is Hamas terrorist activity in the West Bank that threatens our security, the answer is yes. Last week, during the UN General Assembly Week, there was no shortage of speeches and declarations. Some actors in the Middle East posed as peace brokers, while at the same time arming, training, and funding terrorists. Their hands are not clean. They fuel instability, not peace. You know, when you look in our tradition, the rabbis in the Midrash, Tehillim, on Psalm 11, they tell a story about a man, that's thousands of years ago. A man sets fire to a field, then rushes forward with water, pretending to be the savior. That is what we see today. Those who light the match, then step onto the stage to present themselves as peacemaker. Exactly the same. Hypocrisy, dressed as virtue. And what feeds that fire? The absence of leadership. The Palestinian Authority has not governed. It has not led. The Palestinian Authority has filled textbooks with hatred, glorified violence in public squares, and incentivized terror through its pay-to-slay policy. Let me be clear about what this policy means. You heard it a lot, pay-to-slay. What exactly it means. For more than a decade, the Palestinian Authority has paid monthly stipends, not only to terrorists in prison, but also to their families and to the families of suicide bombers. The rule is simple. The more deadly the attack, the higher the payment. And yes, even the terrorists who carried out the October 7th massacre are eligible for payments. This is not social welfare. It is blood money. It rewards murder. It sustains terror. And it is not small. It is not one case or one incident. It's a policy. This policy consumes about 8% of the Palestinian Authority's entire budget. 8%. That is more than $300 million every year. Mr. President, to put that into perspective, the same share, the same ratio would be in Russia over $30 billion a year. In South Korea, $40 billion. And more than $500 billion in the US. This is inconceivable. It is indefensible. You cannot imagine it. You cannot apprehend it. Spending hundreds of millions on this policy. This money should have gone to schools and hospitals. Instead, it goes to salaries for killers. Last week, in his message to the General Assembly, President Abbas claimed that this policy has been, and I quote, reformed. But this is the PA's pattern. Promise after promise after promise, and never deliver. In practice, nothing has changed. What is worse, speaking in Arabic to his own people, President Abbas promised exactly the opposite. He promised them nothing will change. In his own words, spoken recently in Arabic at a meeting of the Fatah Revolutionary Council, he said, and I quote, that's a direct quote, "Even if we have only 1 penny left, it is for the prisoners and martyrs. They must receive everything as it was in the past, and they are more precious than all of us." So I ask, which is the real Abbas? The one who speaks to this council, to the General Assembly, about reforms, or the one who tells his people in Arabic that every last penny will go to terrorists and their families? Enough with the lies. Stop the payments, not in words, but with actions. What is needed is real leadership. Leadership that does not avoid elections for almost 2 decades. Leadership that serves its people, not itself. Leadership brave enough to confront extremists. Leadership with moral clarity to end corruption and incitement. Leadership responsible enough to stop paying salaries to killers. Mr. President, while we take decisive action in Judea and Samaria to remove these threats, our operations in Gaza continue with the same determination to bring our hostages home. Israel fights on multiple fronts, but with a clear purpose. Our objectives are not complicated: to bring the hostages home and to eradicate Hamas. But peace will not come through speeches or declarations. It will only come through courage, accountability, and the will to end terror at its core. This Council faces a choice. You can look away or you can confront reality. Israel has already chosen. We will face reality. We will confront terror. We will secure our future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Israel for the statement. The permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine has asked for the floor to make further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I think it's becoming crystal clear that almost the entire international community is moving in the direction of peace and putting an end to this tragedy in Gaza. The Israeli leadership, not the representative in this room, but his boss, stated it clearly, setting the stage of moving the war to the West Bank, as if what we need is more wars. They're not satisfied with all of the killings and the destruction in Gaza under all the claims that they made. Now they are making it crystal clear, phase 2 or chapter 2 of the same thing, of erasing the Palestinian people, the nation, and they say it very clearly under the banner, no to the two-state solution in which we have global consensus around it, and no to the Palestinian state. So this statement here and the one in the General Assembly Friday is the beginning of having more wars if the ceasefire to be forced on them by all of us, which might be the case in a few days. They are setting the stage to go to chapter 2. We need to prevail, all of us, by giving peace a chance. We do not need to see the repetition of what happened against our people in the Gaza Strip to be in the West Bank. When will the Israeli leaders show leadership and move in the direction for peace? And you know the reason why his boss doesn't want peace? Because the moment they have ceasefire and beginning of peace in Israel, you know what will be the future of the Prime Minister, who is a wanted international criminal by the ICC. So the challenge for us, should we give peace a chance and to start the healing of all of these wounds and to give a political hope and horizon for the Palestinian people and the Israeli people and all the peoples in the Middle East? Or should we continue in this perpetual war forever? We have chosen peace. You have chosen peace. There is a party that is beating the drums to move it in the direction of the West Bank, and we should succeed in not allowing them to do so. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. The representative of Israel has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Mr. President, as I said at the beginning of my speech, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is meeting as we speak with President Trump to discuss a ceasefire, and the negotiators are involved in that negotiations. But I haven't got an answer, Mr. Mansour. Will you stop the payment for terrorists who committed horrible crimes? Will you stop with that policy? You can say no, or you can say yes. And you referred about our activities in Judea and Samaria, and you are absolutely right. If you will not face the extreme forces in Judea and Samaria, we will have to go in and deal with the terrorists. Look what happened in Gaza. We left Gaza 2005, 20 years ago, completely. We gave you the keys. We told you, you will rule Gaza, the PA. You got the opportunity, but you were not able to confront the extremists. Hamas took over, and then we had no choice after October 7th to go in. And if the same will happen in Judea and Samaria, and you will not be able to confront the radicals in Jenin, in Tulkarem, and you will allow them to take over, so what do you think? We will sit idly by and wait for rockets to fly into Israel, or for Hamas to invade Israel from Judea and Samaria? No. You have to face the radical forces. And the fact that you are not able to provide an answer about the payment, about the 8% which I introduced the Council with the numbers, it's worrying all of us. You should confront the radicals, take responsibility. We have no desire to be in Gaza. I have said it many times. We have no desire to go into Jenin and fight Hamas in the camps in Jenin. But it's your responsibility. Every nation, when you have terror activity, you deal with it. You confront it. But if you are not capable of doing it, then the responsibility will be on our shoulders. Thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of Israel for the statement. So, just a second. I give him the floor, but this is the final statement. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Only one question. The whole world is saying we want to have two-state solution, which requires the end of occupation and the independence of the State of Palestine. Is the representative of the State of Israel ready to accept this global consensus or not? Let him share with us his position, the position of his government, instead of taking us in so many small details here and there and avoiding to face the biggest question. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.